Welcome back to Venice, Louisiana. Not too far from here, the massive BP oil spill is pumping 5,000 barrels of oil into the Gulf every day, threatening marshes and wetlands and oyster beds and bird habitats and fishing grounds from Louisiana to Florida and maybe beyond. Louisiana and Mississippi asked the government to declare this a fisheries disaster, qualifying the states for federal disaster aid. If the oil kills off the marsh grasses along the coast, the soil will essentially erode into the sea. With every passing day, more and more crude flows into the Gulf, and if the leak takes months to plug, as some have predicted, this could be the worst environmental disaster in our nation's history. Joining us now is Larry Schweiger. He's President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Wildlife Federation. Larry, it's good to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Great to be here with you.
What is the long-term impact going to be? We obviously don't even know what the short-term magnitude of this spill is, but how do you think about the long-term impact here?
Well, I think there's a lesson to learn from what happened at Exxon Valdez. Last summer, I returned to the Prince William Sound, and the scientists actually dug in the sand at Prince William Sound and found oil on half of the holes that they dug. So the oil was still in Alaska, in the Prince William Sound from the Exxon Valdez. The scientists have looked at the wildlife that were impacted. 1/3 have fully recovered, 2/3 are still in recovery 20 years later. So when you have an oil spill of this magnitude, if it in fact gets into the wetlands, if it does the damage that we fear that will do before it's over, it will have long-term consequences to the resources of this region.
Is there a telltale sign at the National Wildlife Federation when you're trying to assess things like this? Is there a telltale sign that you look for in terms of the magnitude of the environmental impact?
Well, I think for me on Saturday, I overflew much of the area that was covered with oil, and you could see the water was unhealthy. You could just see there was not a shine the way water would normally have. And the scale of this thing is so large, it's hard to describe to people if you don't see it firsthand. But that oil sitting on that water is also mixing in the water column, will be taken up by the fish, by the shellfish. Oysters, for example, take up oil 1,000 times of what's in the water column. So if there's 1 part per million in the water column, they'll have 1,000 parts per million in the oyster. So these systems are like vacuum sweepers. They sweep up the pollutants and they hold them in their tissues, and then they biomagnify up the food chain.
Do you think it is possible to effectively clean a spill like this, a flow like this? We've talked already about accountability, had a spirited exchange with the Environmental Protection Administrator, Lisa Jackson, tonight about that, talking about how blame is one thing, but stopping this thing is another. When we think about accountability, one of the things that we want is somebody to pay, but we also want it to effectively be mitigated. We want this disaster to be stopped and cleaned. Can it be cleaned?
Well, I would flip it the other way and say that BP should have had a plan in place that included the watermen and the fishermen that are in this community. They should have been under contract to be ready to deploy booms when this accident first happened. They weren't. They weren't even trained. They're still training. They were trying to train them. You know, this thing was poorly handled. There was not a management plan put in place long ago to protect these waters, and frankly, it was a failure to act quickly and responsibly that caused this spill to grow to the size that it has, to spread over the Gulf of Mexico the way it has.
The quickness and the responsibility of the response in terms of BP as the responsible party, or are you also frustrated with the federal government?
Well, I think there's a whole system that tilts towards oil wells. There's 750 lobbyists in Washington for big oil. These fishermen have probably 1 or 2, if any, lobbyists in Washington, and the pressure is on them and not on the oil industry, and that's how this has to change. We need to demand that we not only make oil platforms safer, but do we build a new energy platform for America. It's time that we get off the oil barrel. I know a dirty dipstick when I see one, and we need to change our oil future. We need to go a different direction.
Larry Schweiger, President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Wildlife Federation. Thanks for meeting with us. Appreciate it.